On September 18, 2025, a private plane went down in the quiet skies over Franklin, North Carolina. Among the victims was Brett James, one of Nashville's most respected and prolific songwriters. At just 57, his life was cut short in a tragedy that stunned the entire country music world. For decades, Brett James had been the man behind the hits, the voice you never saw but always felt. He wrote the songs that carried Carrie Underwood to superstardom, gave Faith Hill her timeless ballads, and helped Keith Urban deliver anthems of love and heartbreak. Fans sang his words at weddings, funerals, and on long drives across the American South. Yet, when news broke of his death in a fiery crash, the spotlight turned for the first time onto the man who usually lived in the shadows. Everyone thought they knew the songs, but few truly knew the man. Who was Brett James? How did a boy from Oklahoma rise to become one of Nashville's most celebrated hitmakers? And what legacy does he leave behind now that his pen has been forever silenced? The answers reveal a story far deeper and far more haunting than anyone could have imagined. But the truth behind it is much darker. Brett James was born June 5, 1967, in Oklahoma City, a place where country music wasn't just a soundtrack, it was part of everyday life. But Brett's early years were not shaped by the neon lights of Nashville or the stages of Music Row. He grew up in a modest household, far from fame, where dreams often seemed too big for the small-town horizon. Unlike many Nashville legends, Brett didn't immediately chase a guitar or microphone. His first path was one of science and service. He studied at Oklahoma Baptist University before transferring to the University of Oklahoma College of Medicine. For years, it looked as though Brett James was destined to become a doctor, not a songwriter. But even in those long nights of study, music whispered to him. He would sit alone, strumming chords, scribbling lyrics into worn notebooks. Friends noticed his uncanny gift for turning everyday stories into melodies that felt timeless. What began as a hobby grew into a restless calling. By the time he was in his early 20s, Brett knew medicine was not where his heart belonged. With nothing but faith in his pen and a belief that songs could change lives, he abandoned the safe road of medicine for the uncertain journey to Nashville. That choice, a leap of faith, would change not only his own destiny, but the entire sound of country music for decades to come. When Brett James first arrived in Nashville in the early 1990s, he was just another dreamer in a city filled with broken hearts and untold talent. The competition was brutal, the industry unforgiving. At first, he struggled to make ends meet, taking odd jobs while knocking on publishing doors that rarely opened. His first breakthrough came in 1998 when Jessica Andrews recorded Who I Am. The song shot straight to #1 on the country charts and announced Brett James as a songwriter with a voice that could touch millions. Overnight, he went from being a medical student who abandoned the stethoscope to a man whose words filled radios across America. But Brett didn't stop at one hit. Over the next decade, he became one of the most prolific songwriters in Nashville. He penned Jesus, Take the Wheel for Carrie Underwood, a song that not only won 2 Grammy Awards, but also defined her career and became a cultural anthem. He wrote When the Sun Goes Down for Kenny Chesney, a summertime hit that had fans singing across beaches and barbecues. Keith Urban turned to Brett for songs that blended tenderness with raw energy, while Faith Hill found in him a lyricist who could craft ballads with emotional weight. By the 2000s, Brett James was everywhere, though his face remained in the shadows. He was the quiet architect of hits, a man whose words built the careers of superstars. With over 500 songs recorded and 27 reaching #1, Brett didn't just succeed, He became one of Nashville's most trusted, unstoppable hitmakers. And yet, even as the spotlight brushed against him, Brett James never sought fame for himself. He preferred the quiet of the writing room, the magic of creating something out of nothing, and letting others carry his words to the world. This was the golden climb of his career. But like every great story, the brighter the light, the deeper the shadows waiting on the other side. Behind the glittering success, Brett James faced the same shadows that haunt many in Nashville's songwriting circles. Success had given him wealth and recognition, but it also came with crushing expectations. Every artist, every label, wanted the next Jesus Take the Wheel. Every meeting began with the same unspoken demand. Can you do it again? The pressure weighed heavily. Brett had left behind a life of certainty in medicine for the chaos of music. And though he had achieved more than most could ever dream, the industry was relentless. Colleagues later admitted that Brett sometimes appeared exhausted, pulled thin between sessions, tours, and collaborations. Nashville's bright lights can be as isolating as they are rewarding, and for Brett, the silence between hit songs was often deafening. He never spiraled into the notorious scandals that swallowed other stars. No drunken arrests, no public meltdowns. Instead, his battles were quieter, internal. Friends described him as deeply reflective, sometimes burdened by the very gift that had brought him fame. The irony was sharp. The man who wrote words that comforted millions often struggled to comfort himself. He carried the weight of responsibility to his family, to the artists who trusted him, to the fans who expected timeless lyrics. And though the outside world saw only success, those close to him knew Brett James was a man constantly chasing perfection, a man who sometimes felt like he was running out of time. This quiet tension would follow him into the final chapter of his life, a tragedy that no lyric, no melody could soften.
September 18, 2025. A routine flight over the Blue Ridge Mountains became the final chapter in Brett James's story. He was traveling with his wife, Melody Carroll, and her daughter, Merrill Maxwell Wilson, when their small plane suddenly went down near Franklin, North Carolina. Witnesses recalled hearing the engines sputter, followed by a deafening silence before the crash. By the time rescuers reached the wreckage, it was too late. All 3 lives were gone. Brett James was just 57 years old. News of his death spread across Nashville like wildfire. Carrie Underwood posted a heart-wrenching tribute, promising to see him someday in another place. Fellow artists, Kenny Chesney, Miranda Lambert, Keith Urban, each expressed disbelief, mourning not just a collaborator, but a friend. Fans across the world flooded social media with lyrics from his songs, realizing that the man who had given them words in their hardest moments was now gone in an instant. The cruel irony was undeniable. A man who had written about faith, resilience, and surrendering to a higher power met his end in a way that felt almost biblical. Jesus Take the Wheel was no longer just a song. It became a haunting echo of his own final journey. For those who loved his music, the loss was more than personal. It was as though a guiding voice had been silenced, leaving behind only melodies to carry his memory forward.
In the days that followed Brett James's passing, Nashville fell silent. Songwriters, artists, and fans gathered not just to mourn him, but to honor what he had left behind. He wasn't a face on billboards or a voice on the radio, but without him, many of those voices would never have found their power. With over 500 recorded songs and 27 #1 hits, Brett James had carved himself into the very foundation of modern country music. He turned fleeting emotions into timeless anthems. Who I Am gave young dreamers an identity. When the Sun Goes Down brought joy to endless summer nights. And Jesus Take the Wheel offered faith to millions searching for hope. But beyond the accolades, the Grammy, the Hall of Fame, the sold-out tours powered by his lyrics, Brett's true legacy lives in the quiet moments. A mother singing his words to her child, a broken heart finding comfort in a melody, a congregation lifted by a line of faith. His colleagues describe him as humble, deeply kind, and fiercely devoted to the craft of songwriting. He wasn't just chasing hits, he was chasing honesty. And perhaps that is why his songs resonated so deeply, because they were written not for charts, but for people. Brett James may be gone, but his pen will never run dry. His words live on in every voice that sings them, every ear that hears them, and every soul that finds solace in his melodies. He was more than just a songwriter. He was a storyteller of the human heart. And now, though his story has ended, his songs ensure that Brett James will never truly be forgotten.